Hey guys, welcome back to ToonBlend 3D. Here, I'm going to share my process of creating a character sketch as a reference for making a 3D model in Blender. I'm using Krita here, which is a free software, so it really helps a lot, just like Blender. So yeah, big thanks to the developers of both of these amazing tools. Alright, let's just get started. First, open Krita, then create a new image. Set the canvas size you want. Here I'm using 1024 by 1024 since it's for texture, then click OK. After that, you'll see the workspace with a blank white canvas and a background layer. This workspace is already customized by me. So if you're opening Krita for the first time, it probably won't look like this. You can change and customize the workspace however you like. Click the workspace icon on the top right, and you can switch or create different workspaces. Let's switch back to the default workspace for a second. And now, it changes to the default layout. For this example, I'm using a modified version of my previous workspace. You can also add new dockers if you want. Just go to Settings, then Dockers, and check the ones you want to add. For example, let's add the Artistic Color Selector Docker. It shows up in the workspace, and then you can drag it from the top area and place it wherever you want. You can keep adjusting other dockers the same way. You can also move dockers around pretty freely in Krita. It's kind of similar to Blender, but Blender is more limited, usually just swapping positions. Once you're done setting up the workspace, you can save it. Just give it a name, and now your layout is saved, so you don't have to set it up again later. Next, you can also change the theme. Go to Settings, then Theme. I'm using a theme from the Krita artist community made by a member named Zodiaco. This theme really helps me, so big thanks to Zodiaco and the Krita community. I also tweaked it a bit by making the white font color brighter. For the installation, you can check tutorials on YouTube or look it up directly on their discussion forums. Before we start sketching on the canvas, let's pick a brush first. Krita has a lot of brushes, so you've got plenty of options depending on what you want to draw. Personally, I use the basic to opacity brush most of the time. Just go with whatever brush feels comfortable for you, so feel free to try a few. Next, add a new layer. Layers help you separate strokes and colors on the canvas, so it's easier to manage. By default, you'll already have a background layer when creating a new image. Hold Shift, then left-click and drag to adjust the brush size. You can also change the color selector type if you want. Left-click and drag to pick and adjust your brush color. Before jumping into drawing, it's important to decide your base idea first, so think about what you want to create. Write down all your ideas, and you can keep adding more as you go, since ideas usually come during the process. After that, rename this layer as the Idea layer, then add another layer to start sketching. Before sketching, turn on the mirror tool if you want a symmetrical character, especially for front and back views. Use horizontal mirror for left and right symmetry, and vertical mirror for top and bottom. You can also combine both if you want full symmetry. You can lock and hide the mirror so it won't get in the way while you're drawing. Next, start with a simple body shape first. The shape really affects the character's personality. For example, a round shape makes the character feel heavy and slow, while a square shape feels stiff and solid, like a rock. You can check references on Pinterest to learn more about how shapes affect character design. Since I want this character to feel slow, I'm going with a round shape. While sketching, you can also think ahead about whether the form will be easy to model later in 3D. Then start adding elements based on the ideas we wrote earlier. Here, I begin shaping the head with a skull theme. Each part affects the character's personality, especially the face. For example, straight line eyes can make the character feel lazy and passive. Smiling eyes feel more cheerful and friendly. Here I'm using simple round empty eyes, which makes the character feel blank, passive, and kind of mindless, which fits the slow vibe. Then continue building the body so it matches the character's personality. If you want to move a part of the sketch, like this head that feels a bit too low, first, select it using the selection tool. Here I'm using the rectangular selection tool. After selecting the head, use the transform tool or press Ctrl+T. Before moving it, make sure the correct layer is selected, the one that contains your sketch. Then drag it upward. Hold Shift to keep the movement straight. If you want to scale it, drag from the corner of the transform box. Hold Alt so it scales evenly from both sides, and hold Shift to keep the proportions consistent. Next, let's check our idea list. Looks like most of it is done, but we still need to add the cactus feel. So I look for cactus references on Pinterest and simplify it into key elements like flowers and the vertical lines on the body. Then start applying those to the character, like adding a flower on the back and the body line. Cactus is also known for its spikes, but here I won't make them as actual geometry. Instead, I'll add them later in the texture details. Then continue refining the body. For example, making the belly a bit bigger to give a heavier feel. Now all the main ideas are already applied to the character, but it still looks a bit too plain, so maybe we can add one more element. At first I thought about adding knuckles, since the hands look empty. But then I decided to switch it to handcuffs. I'm planning to make this character low poly later, so I try to keep the shapes as simple as possible. Then add some small details, like scratches on the forehead, so it doesn't feel too plain. And don't forget to save your file regularly. Before moving on to the side view, adjust the position and scale of the front view first, so it sits nicely in the center of the canvas. Next, create a new layer for the right view. Then lower the opacity of the front view layer so it doesn't get in the way and can be used as a guide. Make sure to turn off the mirror before starting the right side. Start by matching the top part of the character first. Use the front flower as a reference for the top height. You can use mirror view and rotate canvas to make drawing more comfortable. Here, the back part is actually higher than the front, which shouldn't happen if we use the front as the height reference. So if we leave it like this, the right side won't match properly with the front and back views. For the head, you can draw a straight guideline to help keep the position accurate. Then continue by adding the flower on the back. You can redraw it manually or just copy it. Select the first flower, press Ctrl+C, then paste it with Ctrl+V. When you paste, it will create a new layer. Then move it using the transform tool and adjust the position. By copying it, all the flowers will have the same shape. To merge it, right-click the new layer, then choose Merge with Layer Below or press Ctrl+E. Make sure the layer below is the correct one before merging. Then continue shaping the handcuffs while cleaning up the previous sketch lines. Use hatching to mark areas that will be darker later, and keep adding small details to refine the character. Next, let's create another version of the right side, but without the arm. This helps us clearly define the belly shape that was previously covered. Duplicate the layer by right-clicking and choosing Duplicate Layer, or just press Ctrl+J. Then hide the first right layer and remove the arm on the duplicated right layer. Then turn the first right layer back on and lower the opacity. Then continue shaping the belly on the duplicated right layer. Once done, you can rename the layer if you want. After that, group both right side layers, select both layers while holding Ctrl. Then right-click and choose Quick Group or press Ctrl+G. Next, let's create the back view. Duplicate the front layer and rename it to Back. Then remove the head and belly parts and adjust the arm lines to be straighter so it forms the back shape. Continue by adding details and the flower using the right view as a reference. Next, you can add paw details on the bottom of the hands and feet. This part is optional since the bottom of the character isn't usually very visible. Just adjust it based on your needs. Create a new layer for the paw, then look for references like cat paws or even the inside texture of a cactus. Once done, you can merge it back into the front layer. And after this, we're ready to move on to coloring. Before we start, group all the front, right, and back layers into one group. Then rename it to mark that this group has no color. Next, create a new layer for building a color palette. In Krita, there's a palette docker available, so you can pick colors from existing palettes, but sometimes it's still confusing to decide which colors to use and how to combine them. So before that, let's go over a bit of basic color theory, just the fundamentals like hue, saturation, and value. You can also learn basic color combinations like analog, complementary, triadic, and others. There are tons of references on Pinterest and YouTube that explain these really well. After learning the basics, it might feel like coloring is complicated, but don't overthink it too much. Just use color theory as a guide, not a strict rule. Because if you stress too much, you might not finish the coloring at all. So the key is to stay relaxed and enjoy the process. Next, let's choose the main color or dominant color. Since the biggest part of this character is the cactus body, we'll go with green as the main color. You can adjust the saturation level using the artistic color selector. Once you've picked the main color, try applying color combination methods from color theory. Start with complementary, where the second color is opposite of the main color. Then split complementary, which is similar, but one side is split into two options. Then analog, where colors are taken from nearby hues of the main color. Then triadic, where the colors form a triangle on the color wheel. Then tetradic, which forms a rectangle. And lastly, square, which is similar to triadic, but forms a square. And honestly, you can also mix these approaches to get the results you like. After that, rename the layer to palette. Then duplicate the layer and choose the palette that feels right. Here I'm going with the triadic palette, and I delete the rest. Now start coloring the character. Begin with the body, then move to the flower, and finally, the handcuffs. Next, choose a color for the skull head. I'm using a slightly greenish white, kind of similar to an analog approach. Then fill in the skull head. For the paw, this part is optional. Even though I plan to texture it later in Blender, I decided to remove it. Somehow, it feels a bit uncomfortable visually, like it might trigger trypophobia because of the dense, small shapes, so I feel like it could be distracting. Next, we'll pick additional colors from each main color using an analog approach. Start from the green, then shift the hue slightly left and right to get highlight and shadow colors. Then begin adding highlights and shadows to the character. Use alpha lock on the layer so when you paint, the color stays within the existing pixels. After that, add more details to the body like scratches and small holes. You can also add color variations by slightly shifting the hue and value depending on what you need. Then repeat the same process for the flower and the handcuffs. For this coloring stage, I'm only painting the front view because I think it's enough as a reference for coloring later in 3D, even though the final result in 3D will definitely look a bit different from this reference. After finishing the coloring, let's check the value composition using Grayscale. This is important to make sure the focus of the character reads clearly. Press Ctrl plus Shift plus U to activate the Desaturate filter and turn everything into Grayscale. Then choose Create Filter Mask. This way, you can toggle it on and off anytime. As you can see, the grayscale values already have some contrast between objects, especially between the head and the body. But the contrast still feels a bit weak in some areas, so I'll adjust the handcuffs and the flower. For the handcuffs, try adjusting the value. Make it brighter than the body if you want it to stand out more. Or darker if you want the body to be more dominant. Here, I make it darker because I want the body to stand out. You can control the value by adjusting the saturation and brightness of the color. Once it feels right, rebuild the palette again using an analog approach. Then do the same process for the flower. After that, update your triadic palette and remove any unused colors. Then finish up the coloring, like refining small parts if needed. Next, we save each view, front, right, and back. You can use export or save as. Here, I'm using export. Before exporting, make sure only the layers you want are visible. For example, if you want to export the front view with colors, just enable the front sketch and color layers. Then go to File and choose Export. Give it a name and make sure to add a view label at the end, like using a capital F for the front view. Then repeat the same steps for the right and back views. And that's it. The sketch reference for creating the 3D character is done. Next, we'll continue by building the 3D version in Blender. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.